Hi, I'm Mr. Symonds, and in this video, I'm going to give you a brief update about the federal budget. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the 2020 federal budget because there's, well, a lot to go through. But what I'm going to try and do is make it as simple as possible and focus on 4 key measures that you can think about to help with your short and extended responses in the HSC exam. So the first thing to discuss is the fact that the budget is usually handed down in May of each year, and this year was very different. Because of COVID-19, the Morrison government wanted to wait to see more about what the outcome of the pandemic was likely to be, the kind of effects and the economic repercussions, before announcing its plans for the federal budget and its spending and revenue measures for 2020-2021. So in October of 2020, we had the budget handed down, which goes from 2020 through to 2021. It's a very unusual situation, but 2020 is a very unusual year. In terms of the overall picture of the budget and fiscal policy and its interaction with monetary policy, I've got a separate discussion with an economist, Steve Milch, and you can see that with the link above or link in the description to that video. Okay, so let's look at the specific measures of the 2020-2021 federal budget. So in terms of our discussion, we're going to look at 4 things. So tax cuts, cash payments, wage subsidy, and infrastructure spending. Let's start by focusing on the tax cuts. Now I'm going to reference my notes a little bit here to make sure I get the numbers all correct. So the federal government is bringing forward its second stage of its planned tax cuts. So what it's doing is it's changing the tax brackets to change the amount of tax paid, and in some cases reduce the amount of tax paid, so that money will hopefully be injected into the economy via consumption. So if we look at the specific measures... Okay, so I tried to record this a couple of times and was pretty unsuccessful. So I've decided to do it a little bit differently here. Let's grab a black pen. So I'm taking this from a website called Super Guide that has taken the information on the tax brackets from the ATO and they've put them in a handy table. So if we look down here, we've got 2 columns. Let's use this. So this is the tax brackets for 2018-19 and 2019-20. So for our purposes, let's call these the old ones. And then here, these are the new tax brackets that will take effect from 2020-21. So let's focus on a couple of brackets here. Let's grab this, purple is fine. Can you see here that the old bracket was between $18,201 and $37,000. So if you earned between these amounts, you would pay tax rate of 19%, a marginal rate of 19%. If you look here at this tax bracket, if you earned between these amounts, you would pay that base amount, and then you would pay 32.5 cents in the dollar for amounts over $37,000. Okay, so let's look at the new situation, and let's grab here. Can you see here what the government has done is they have expanded this bracket? So before it used to stop at 37, now it's at 45,000. So let's say that under the old system, if you earn 39,000, right, that you would pay 37,000 at 19%, and then you would pay the extra $2,000 at 32.5% because it would take you into that next bracket. But now, because the bracket goes up to 45,000, if I earn 39,000, all of it will be taxed at 19%, so I will save some money. If I look at this other bracket here, can you see that rather than stopping at 90,000, this new bracket stops at 120,000. So let's say that I used to earn $120,000. That means that 90,000 would have been taxed at 32.5%, and then that extra 30,000 would have actually gone here to the 37%. So that's how it would have broken down. But now, if I earn 120,000, it's all at 32.5%. So I will save money here. So what is happening is that the new tax rates are reducing the tax paid for some Australians, which will allow them to keep more money in the form of disposable income, and hopefully they will use that to consume and boost aggregate demand. So the second measure we'll look at is cash payments. And so the Morrison government is going to be given cash to people who are currently receiving some form of government benefits. So they're going to get an extra $500 in their pocket without having to do anything. One payment taking place in December 2020 and the other taking place in March 2021. And the total value of this payment is $500. So this applies to people who have received government payments such as the age pension, disability support pension, and carer payments. So any of those people, they're just going to automatically get this money that will again, hopefully be used towards consumption in the economy to try and boost aggregate demand. The third measure that is useful to know is this wage subsidy for employers. Now, a wage subsidy is where, in this case, the government is paying part of wages for firms. So before, firms are going to have to pay all of that money that an employee costs. Here, the government is going to give them some cash to go towards paying for that employee. So the hope here is that if the government subsidises the cost of a worker, if the government makes it cheaper for someone to employ someone, then firms might employ more workers, and particularly in this case, more younger workers. So if we look at the situation in terms of COVID-19, that young Australians have been particularly hard hit in terms of employment. If we look at the figures, in September, employment rates for people aged 18 to 24 were the lowest for all age groups. You can see that in this chart, and this will be linked in the description. So to try and address this situation, the government is going to pay employers a subsidy to try and encourage them to make it easier for them to hire workers. So if a firm hires a worker under the age of 30, businesses will receive what's called a job maker credit of $200 per week for 12 months. So this will reduce the cost of employing someone and hopefully boost employment in that sort of young people category, in that 18 to 24 category, which has been quite hard hit during COVID-19. The fourth thing to think about is a much simpler idea, that is infrastructure spending. The federal government has allocated $14 billion over the next 4 years on a range of infrastructure projects. The important part about infrastructure is that it's giving the economy a boost now in terms of creating jobs, demand for raw materials, everything to get those projects up and running. And then in the long term, it could provide a boost to aggregate supply as well, a boost to the productive capacity of the economy too. So these projects include highway and bridge upgrades as well as rail improvements, and that they are another crucial part of the federal government trying to boost aggregate demand now to offset the effects of the pandemic and potentially boosting aggregate supply, the productive capacity of the economy in the future. Let's think about the debt and deficit situation in terms of the federal budget. So all of these spending measures cost a lot of money. The government is really injecting a lot of money into the economy and also reducing the amount of revenue it is collecting through those tax changes. So if we think about some of the measures, the cost of the tax cuts, according to the government, is $50 billion. And the cost of the wage subsidy, that's $4 billion. And that's not even the whole story. In terms of what this actually means, pre-COVID, the government was expecting a budget surplus of $6 billion for the 2019-2020 financial year. Now that didn't happen, that instead there was an $86 billion deficit for 2019-2020. But how will that deficit change into the future? So according to the government's own figures, that in 2021, the budget deficit is expected to exceed $213 billion. That is a big turnaround from the surplus that the government was hoping for pre-pandemic. The other thing is that the government expects its net debt, so the amount of money it will owe to finance the budget deficits, so the amount of money that it is borrowing to be able to pay for all this extra spending, that net debt will peak at $966 billion in 2024, and this represents about 44% of the country's GDP at that time. So a very large increase in Australia's debt because of that increase in those budget deficits, because of that extra spending that is being undertaken to try and improve the economy during COVID-19. These are the kind of key things that I would suggest focusing on in order to showcase your knowledge about the budget and to really demonstrate why the government is doing what it's doing in order to speed up the economy and offset the effects of the pandemic. Okay, all the links will be in the description to the articles and the different videos that I've discussed. Any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.